So before we get started, in the spirit of reconciliation, Alongside Families would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining or watching this webinar today. My name is Bree and I'm joining today from the lands of the Murrumbidgee people on Yuin country. I do encourage you to share which lands you're joining from in the chat. Okay, I'll just make sure we haven't had Dr. Palmer join. Okay, she's still wrapping up a meeting and will be with us soon. Okay, so welcome to our final session in the genetics webinar series, Shaping the Future. So this collaboration between Alongside Families and the Genetic Alliance Australia has taken us on quite a journey together. We started with those first questions about whether something might be genetic, worked through understanding test results, and learned practical strategies for navigating daily systems. Today, we're going to step back from the immediate challenges to explore the bigger picture, what the future might hold for your child, your family, and the broader genetics community. So this session is about seeing your family not just as recipients of support and services, but as contributors to positive change. So whether through participating in research, preparing for your child's transitions to adult services, or adding your voice to advocacy efforts, there are many ways your experience can shape a better future for families who will walk this path after you. So we will be joined by two remarkable speakers today. Dr. Palmer, who will be with us shortly, is a clinical geneticist at Sydney Children's Hospital Network and a lecturer at University of New South Wales. She's passionate about improving the diagnostic and care journey for individuals with rare genetic conditions and their families. Her work focuses on clinician education, increasing diagnostic accuracy, and connecting families with evidence-based treatments and support. And she's actually published over 100 peer-reviewed articles and committed to centering the patient and family voice in all her research. And I can see she's joined us.
And it's very late.
That's okay.
I'm going to this on a clinical day. I'm so sorry, Bree, for giving everyone a heart attack. I'm here.
That's okay. We just started without you and knew that you would get here eventually, and know that you're very busy. So thank you so much for joining us. We're also joined by Chris Pearce, and Chris serves as the Director of Consumer Involvement at Child Unlimited, also the University of New South Wales, and is a recognised leader in healthcare advocacy and consumer engagement. She co-founded, and I'm going to hopefully say this right, Chris, SCN2A. Is that how we say it? Yes. Okay. I wasn't sure how those acronyms work together, Australia, and she's actually contributed to work on the International League Against Epilepsy, Global Dreams, and the Epilepsy Foundation. You actually inducted into the Victoria's Women's Honour Roll and nominated for the Children's Healthcare Australasia Medal of Distinction. So very excited to have you both here. And as always, delighted to be joined by Emma, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Genetic Alliance Australia. As with previous sessions, Emma is going to be monitoring the chat and the Q&A box throughout the session, helping to ensure we address your questions and connect you to additional resources as needed. So today we're going to explore research opportunities that might benefit your family, practical steps for long-term planning as your child grows and transitions, and ways you can contribute to advocacy and systemic change because your voice matters more than you think. Okay, so today is about hope. We know that navigating a genetic diagnosis brings challenges, but it also connects you to a community of researchers, advocates, and families working towards better outcomes for everyone. So today is about discovering your place in that community and the role you play in shaping what comes next. So I'm really excited to explore this. And I think we're just going to dive straight into some questions with our wonderful guests. And I want to start with demystifying research and advice on navigating the research landscape in Australia. Now, that sounds like a lot, but I want to come to you first, Emma. When you talk to families about research opportunities, what do you want them to understand? Like, how do you help them see research as something accessible and valuable?
Yeah, it's such a good question because I think research is often in this area of mystical science and It doesn't help, I don't think, that the consent forms that we have to get approved by research officers, there's so much compulsory words that we have to add that they can blow out to be an 8-page document, which you would, I think, have to have a degree in genetics to even start to understand. So it's really hard. And it's actually something that, Chris and I have both thought about deeply about how we make research more accessible. I think the first thing is maybe starting to set some expectations about research even early in the journey. So we think about genetics, we're pretty bad at what we do, in that at least 1 in 2 people we suspect has a genetic condition because of the clinical features that they have, how they're presenting a family history. And I'm like, I think it would be something we should explore, or are you open to exploring? We talk about genetic tests. We only get an answer a half of the time. So this is a test, approved, Medicare funded, and half of the time, no clear answer. And it's not because that person doesn't have a genetic condition, it's that we're still in the science exploratory stage of genetics. So as a little snapshot, I mean, Chris and I, my passion, one of our many overlapping passions is around genetic epilepsies. I did my PhD on that. And when I started, it was quite a long PhD because I had a couple of babies and, etc. along the way. We were getting an answer for less than 5% of people. So, and almost epilepsy wasn't considered genetic. And then I'm talking about early onset epilepsy. And then by the time I finished my PhD, we had these new technologies that came on board, a panel test where we can look at lots of genes, and then exome sequencing when we can read the speaking bits of our genome that makes proteins, and then onto whole genome sequencing. And we were getting up to getting an answer for 3/4 of people. But that's through research. And each week, a new genetic condition was being described. So our tests are still getting better about how we can understand the genetics, and our knowledge of what genetic conditions are still getting better. So that's really starting with a starting point that, and this is where I think there's a paper thin line between what is diagnosis and clinical work and what is research. Because for half of my families, if we're going to try and get a diagnosis, I need to be having the conversation about research.
Yep.
So I think that's the first thing, is starting off with setting expectations that this is something that often comes up. We don't get an answer, and then these are the ways that we might move forward.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's definitely been a common theme, just how much the landscape is changing in genetics and how quickly it changes.
Yep.
It's definitely been a bit of a surprise for me throughout this series to learn that. Chris, from your advocacy perspective, how did you first get involved in research? And what would you say to families who are a little bit curious but maybe unsure?
Yes, well, I guess my journey into research was our own family, personal journey. So Will was my 24-year-old son now, presented with complex epilepsy, but a whole range of other comorbidities that just, didn't make sense. Was very early on in the journey of understanding genetic epilepsies. And so at that time, when we were trying to find an answer when he was, young, there wasn't, Will's gene hadn't been discovered and it wasn't part of the testing. So we had to go in, if we wanted to keep searching for an answer, we had to go into a research project like what Emma mentioned. So that was our journey into genomics research, I guess. But I did also kind of, when I was thinking about this question, was thinking about it a little bit more broadly, and how as families we look at research. And I think part of it for me, and the drive now for the work I do, is really the siloed healthcare that our children with complex conditions face, and just frustration and wanting to fix it. So that sort of drove me to get involved in other projects where I felt that I could add value. And I guess part of that was realizing that even though I wasn't a researcher, our family story had value in shaping not only understanding, but also planning potentially those changes. And really, I guess the advice I would have is that, or what I've learned over that time is that if you're in the right place with the right researchers, this is a partnership. We work on navigating the challenges together, and it's not so as official as it sounds, and that we, as a partner or an advocate, you build this really trusted relationship where research isn't scary. It's part of just sharing our story and trying to change, I guess, the trajectory of our I guess our own children's story, but those who have similar conditions as well.
Yeah. You just said around that, the right places with the right researchers. And I guess that's something that probably comes up for families around finding research that fits your family. So I want to come to you, Emma, and how should families go about finding research that might be relevant to their child's condition? And what questions should they ask researchers?
Such a good question. I'm just thinking as Chris was talking, do we need to do a FAQs of what to ask your researcher? Because it really is that. And I think it comes down to that partnership. So if I was thinking about whether I was going to include my family in research, I would be thinking, what is this for? So is this just an academic exercise? It's going to make a nice shiny publication that will sit on a wall and never get used? Or what is the path for this research actually changing something that aligns with my values for my family? So say it was about my child's condition, I might be really concerned about there's no treatment. And is this research something that I know there's no guarantees, but at least has a path towards how that might translate ultimately into treatment or diagnosis. And if it's the kind of, I guess we call health service research that Chris was talking about, which is a lot of actually I kind of fallen into because the system's broken. The system is broken for people with rare diseases because they have not been consulted. It's a model of healthcare that was made for infections, something that people can be treated for and they leave. And these are chronic, complex, multi-system, uncertain conditions. The health system at the moment is not fit for purpose. And we can only, attack a wicked challenge if that is the people who are missing out and who need this done are included right from the start. So I would be asking those kind of questions. How was your research framed by the community? How is the community being consulted? How will I know what the outcomes of this research are? Are you going to give that to me in a way that I can understand? And then what's the next step after this? I don't know. Those would be some of the things I would think about. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, look, I had similar things. So yeah, I would be looking for the benefit. Is the benefit for either my child or others with similar conditions or broader conditions? Is that at the forefront of the request for the research? Because that is, it's important. We get asked as families to participate in a number of research projects, and I think that can be exhausting in itself, telling your story and telling it over and over again. So I would really be looking for signs of respect of your journey and your family's experiences, that they really shine through in the communications that come from any research team. In terms of where I would look for resources, I would tend to go to either a peak body in your disease or a trusted university department that works with your child's disease or disability. The other things that I would look for is looking at, the design of the research. Can you actually see that what your experience in that research is actually going to be has been considered in the process? So they're not asking you to go to hospital, stay overnight once a month, and you can really see where the impact of participating has been really considered, and that will be evidence that they've actually had consumers involved from very, very early on. The other thing I would look for through my experience is there, and this aligns with what Emma said, is there a plan to implement this? How are you going to translate this research to actually make a difference? There is still a lot of research that just happens and sits on a shelf, and that's not just sitting with researchers and university. That's also federally funded research. You know, things. We spend many years on specific research projects, and to not see that activated when there's positive or either negative results from that research, and it not making a difference. So I think there's some key indicators that families can look for in terms of positive opportunities to be involved in research. Yeah.
And it sounds like we might need to develop that resource around questions to ask researchers. I'm sure we could probably collate a few of those ones you guys have just said into a resource. I'll get Emma onto that. Let's move now into sort of just a little bit of talk about advocacy and voice. So many families, you know, they want to make a difference but don't know how to start. So Chris, can you share your journey from being a parent seeking answers to becoming a recognized advocacy leader? Like, what were your first steps?
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other night, and I think a simple answer to this is, if you have a child with a disability, a medical condition, whether they're complex or not, you advocate whether you know it or not. Because like Emma said, the system, it's siloed, it's broken. And if you're trying to navigate between health, disability, education, I don't think I've ever heard of someone that said that's a smooth ride across any of that. So I feel like you are advocating from the get-go. And for us, it started when our son was a baby in hospital, and they wanted to send him home. And they said, oh, he's got epilepsy, just get on with it. And I'm like, yes, but I had the privilege of having his twin sister who was doing things that he wasn't doing. And so I was able to get in there and advocate and say, this is actually more than epilepsy. And it really went from there. It went to when we tried to get him into childcare. And I know this still happens in 2025, that there's no childcare or very minimal childcare for children with medically complex conditions. And, you know, trying to find somewhere where I could get a break. You know, and then you go on to, you know, other transition points, you know, trying to get into school, you know, all those individual education plan meetings, you know, like these are meetings, these are what we do on a day-to-day basis as parents. And in each of those meetings, we are advocating for our child. So I would say that we're all doing it. And throughout our child or loved one's, you know, trajectory across all those systems. And I think for me, I have a really strong conviction that if we can see something needs improvement or change, then to step, you know, don't just complain, like step forward and see if you can make a contribution and try and leave that challenge in a better place than you found it, for those that are following in our footsteps. And I think in terms of leadership, which doesn't necessarily resonate with me, but I feel like it for me, it came through building trusted networks. And, you know, a few ladies in this room where, you know, just built those connections, and we often will touch base and go, oh, you know, this happened, how can we do this? And then you start building really strong networks and people that you can work on projects with and start advocating more at either a national or an international level. So I would just say it's built over time, yeah, with the mindset of leaving a positive impact along the way, hopefully.
Yeah. I'm sure you've already made a positive impact along the way there, Chris. And you are a recognized advocacy leader, so don't shy away from that. You should be proud of what you've done so far. Emma, from your research perspective, how do family voices influence and improve the work you do? Like, what impact do you actually see from hearing from families?
I hope that all my research now is because of families. And I truly think it is. And I say that because I didn't used to do research like that, and I'm still learning, and I often get things wrong, and that's okay. It's fine to take turns and just be open to how you can learn. By getting things wrong, you learn. But I remember, my PhD research I said was, it's really hard sciencey finding new genetic conditions. And then it was the fact that I'm this thing called a clinician researcher, which means I do research, but see families. And I would go to these families and say, and we were so excited, we were high-fiving because we'd found this, new genetic diagnosis. And then you'd sit down with a family and you'd have to answer, well, how does this change things for me? What is the treatment? What is the natural history? Where are the other families? And then seeing how I can't answer any of those questions. And so then that drove, I guess, where my research has gone, because there are many people who are much better at doing scientific experiments and not flooding labs and things like I used to do than me. But I think what has to change, that will keep ticking along in the background, is how do we make these advances actually meaningful for everyone? And that I think we have a huge, the health system for those living with rare genetic conditions is not fit for purpose, and it is especially not fit for purpose for people where English isn't their first language, where they're living in rural and remote areas, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families, people with disabilities and intellectual disabilities. So I guess that's where my research has gone, and everything that I do has come from a family pointing out things that are wrong, but also being so amazing. And so I learn from every clinical appointment that I have from families. So I hope that answers it. I think it's everything.
Yeah, amazing. And yeah, I think, yeah, just the collective knowledge and experience that families bring to this space is it's invaluable. Chris, not everyone feels called to big advocacy roles. What about some smaller contributions? So what are the smaller ways families can contribute to positive change? And how can someone make a difference without taking on a huge commitment?
Yeah. Well, the simple answer, I think, is really telling your story. Telling your family story, whether it's, with your current, support team, allied health support team, your medical team, over a coffee with other mothers. We're telling them, we're raising awareness around what our family's life looks like, positive and challenges. So I think really that's probably the most important piece. And again, it's not comfortable for anyone, but I think I was at a meeting the other night on it was a neurological, so broader, but the panel were asked, what's what can we do as individuals? And they said, tell your story. So I think you can start there, but it might be just having a one-on-one conversation with someone in a similar position, and just that peer support, and just making sure that people in your community have that support. Other ways that I thought of is joining a focus group. So that might come down to, it might be research where it's it's not you're in a group setting, so it's not as intimidating perhaps, but you're able to share your voice and maybe some concerns or constructive ideas that you have. Join an advisory panel. A lot of people working in research set up advisory groups for specific areas. Like so for at Child Unlimited, we have a consumer board, but we also have a youth group. We also have a rural consumer group. So, there's opportunities to come in and shape those conversations, that are supported by someone like me who understands it from the consumer side. And I guess the other thing I would say is lean into your strengths. So, for example, um, you might be strong at writing, so maybe you want to write your story and submit it somewhere. It might be just emailing it to the hospital or the local paper on an awareness day. Showing up and doing some networking or attending events like what Genetic Alliance Australia are holding. They've got one tomorrow night, and just being there with other people. I think just showing up in a in a in a positive way where you feel that you can make a difference that's comfortable for you. It doesn't always need to look the same. And I remember a few years back I went to a rare diseases event, and I was told I was advocating wrong. There's only one way to do it. It's bollocks. There's so many different ways to do it. Of course, if you're advocating at the federal government level, there are better ways to do it, but it's not a one way, fits all situation. So yeah, lean in, talk to someone, get a mentor. Yeah, lots of different ways to get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Emma, how do everyday families contribute to your research and clinical work? And what are those seemingly small actions that actually can have a big impact?
So I was also reflecting on this, like, there's an incredible person called Rachel Callender who is she's based now in Western Australia, and she came and talked to our genetics conference. And Rachel had a little daughter, Evie, who died when she was about 2.5, and she had two complex chromosomal conditions. And it was, so I was actually interviewing Rachel myself last night for a podcast series we're doing through our Gene Equal work. And I just reflected how hearing her experiences, her honesty about the awful impact that the words the clinicians used about Evie, the form she was filling in where she couldn't tick a single box, and then how she came through that and is now teaching clinicians around the world how to better communicate about genetic conditions. So that was it. It's when you hear a story from the heart, and it doesn't have to be, and there's an answer there. It's just those stories make so much impact. I think we think there has to be a massive, Nature review paper or something like that, but actually a personal story can change a researcher's, direction completely. So, but sharing your story is not easy, and you need to make sure you've got protections in place, and it's your story in your way, and you know how to do that. And like I think is mentioned in the chat, there are a number of guides for kind of consumers, and there are various organizations that might have an ambassador program or something like that. So I think talking to mentors, to other people, and making sure if you are sharing your story, it's on your own terms. But it can absolutely, I think, always makes a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I'm going to shift a little bit here, and move on to around, which has been a very common theme that's come up in all of our webinars so far, around building connections with other families. I feel like a broken record, but I feel like it's come up in every session, and obviously it's very, very important. So Chris, how do you help families find and connect with their community? And what's the value of these connections beyond the emotional support?
Yeah. Look, I was really bad at this, but largely because we didn't have a diagnosis and I didn't feel like I fit anywhere. And when I say our family, didn't fit in the autism, didn't fit in the epilepsy. There was just too much. And yeah, I didn't feel like I fitted in anywhere, and found Swan way too late. But syndromes without names. But I think, just to give you an example of the power of it, and this was a research project, but it was also for caregivers. It was for families impacted by complex rare epilepsies. So actually, Emma and I ran well, a caregiver retreat, and we are just about to publish a paper on that. And in it, probably the strongest thing that came through was connecting with people who understand your story and will understand, what your day-to-day life is like. And so I think there's probably people who are okay, or find comfort in connecting with a broader group of people in similar, but then there's also families who just want to know that it's a safe space. These people understand. I can say how hard it is, that I don't want to get out of bed in the morning. I can't go to another doctor's surgery. I don't want to tell my story again. So I would say, trying to find a group that is either specific to your condition. I would say, it's got the right, for want of a better word, the right vibe, the right energy. Some people like to be able to talk about the challenges, and other people like to talk about resources and what they can be accessing, where they can get, different treatments, or, and some people are looking for research opportunities. So I would say finding the right type of group for you. And, it's going to look different for everyone. The thing I would say is also not reinventing, groups when there are groups, or, there's so much power in this sort of collaboration and collective approach when we're looking to, I guess, drive things forward. It's not so much about the connection, but I think there's kind of different places that you can lean into. And I think that sort of broader collective advocacy is really important. There's, like Emma said, there's like 1,000 genetic epilepsies. And if we have all those 1,000 epilepsy groups setting up like SCN2A, and trying to drive change individually, then that's really hard. So yeah, I don't know. Find your people is probably what I would say. I don't know if that's particularly been helpful, but yeah.
I think it's helpful. Absolutely. And I think for families out there that may not have that definitive answer, and there might not be that condition-specific group, there's still commonality in the experiences that people have. So
Yeah.
yeah, and maybe it's just finding out what you need right now. And it doesn't mean you can't tap in and tap out of other organizations or other groups, but they might not be your place right this moment, but they might be in a year or two.
Yeah. I remember when I was, went into mother's group when the twins were babies. And I reckon by about month 3, they were talking about what private schools they were going to send their kids to. And I was just like,
and you're like, I'm going to tap out.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of condition-specific groups and community networks, Dr. Palmer, I want to come to you about, how or what role do they play in advancing research and care, and how do those condition-specific groups and community networks actually influence your work?
Yeah, critical. And I think yeah, just coming back to that connection, like I think, so I'm just thinking about 3 grants I'm writing at the moment, but they all have the word connection, because it's all about connection. And I think if we're going to try and truly change this health system, then we have to break down the silos between patients, families, clinicians, researchers, funders, health services, and actually all start connecting in a meaningful way together. So, for me, the power of organizations that are, I guess, the peaks like Genetic Alliance and SWAN, is that they speak for many people that don't have a voice, many people that they don't have a patient advocacy group. And then the individual patient advocacy groups, again, they have, for them, so often the priority is actually getting research done more into the conditions that they're looking at. And so they're super savvy, they're well mentored, they've got the connections across internationally with industry, and we would be fools not to work alongside them because they are most amazing partners. But I think we have to be respectful of that, and we have to acknowledge that most of these incredible foundations are run on nothing, and these aren't paid people, and this isn't their job. They're doing usually 10 other jobs as well. And so if we are inviting them into our research, they need to be remunerated and they need to be recognized. And especially if we're thinking about broadening the diversity of voices that are influencing our research, go beyond a financial reimbursement. And Chris is incredible on this. A proper consumer community engagement strategy involves, how do we mentor these people? How do we make sure they can get childcare cover? How can they have a translator? How can they have a disability support worker? So we really are listening and working alongside as many different organizations as possible.
Yeah, amazing. Again, you just mentioned family voices, and I want to come to you, Chris, because based on your extensive advocacy experience, what systemic changes have you seen that were driven by family voices, and what gives you hope?
Look, I think, like in my, in the last sort of 5-6 years, since I've probably, been working more as, I guess, a professional in the space, the big changes I've seen is that families are being asked about what their priorities are, like what's going to make the biggest change, positive impact on their day-to-day life. And so for me, I now see families in a bigger, ecosystem of, health system driving priorities. Whereas, 10 years ago, Emma touched on it before, where, researchers or, the health dollar was put into certain, go and work on this, or we're really interested in understanding this aspect, whereas now families are driving that priority. And that's how we sort of run our how we run Child Unlimited, that is based on priorities, and that's through working with not-for-profits and consumers themselves, and also the researchers as a collective team. And that's also looking at the broader things, also like what Emma mentions, that we're not doing things in silos as well. I think the patient or the advocacy voice has said, you've got to bring us into the tent, and not, come to us down the road. I've seen big changes in support for certain healthcare groups. I think that's yet to come in rare disease. That investment, whether it's resources, research, that's something to come, but we're seeing in other health conditions. So for example, one piece recently is the support of endometriosis clinics and some resources there. I think we need to see that come into rare diseases. But what I would say is what the current government is looking for is people coming in with a collective voice, not going in with individual conditions. They want to see, this sort of, to improve neurological conditions, we're all coming together and saying these are the big things that need to change. We're not asking for dollars in SCN2A, we're asking for health services changes. We're looking for psychologists to look after our family's well-being. So I would say, there's a lot of big things, a lot of systems change that have happened due to advocacy. Breast cancer is another example. I think that's had a really big shift recently. Rare cancers, seeing a lot more resources going into that. And I think, rare diseases, hopefully rare epilepsies disease in particular, are going to see that shift coming soon. But it's all part of advocacy. You know, these things don't change without a consistent, you know, advocacy, you know, plan, and it needs to be evidence-based as well. You know, you can't go and just say, I want. It needs to be based on evidence. And again, it comes back to working with trusted researchers in your community's area.
Yeah. We've talked about the genetics landscape being ever evolving, but Emma, how has the field of genetics changed in terms of including families' perspectives? And what do you see the most exciting developments happening?
Look, I honestly feel we're a bit behind the time in genetics. I think the last human genetics conference was the first time, 2025. We had people with genetic conditions, living with genetic conditions, speaking in the opening ceremony. Jovi Skudis from Angelina Kask Foundation and Mel Anderson from the Pura Foundation spoke. I mean, there wasn't a dry eye. They got standing ovations, and it was way too late. And I have to credit my lovely friend Em here for, you know, supporting those and families to help that come about. So, you know, I couldn't imagine that a childhood cancer, for example, conference, I'm sure families have been attending for many years. So we're slow to catch up. I think there is some really exciting work being done. I think one of those things is around how a diagnosis is given and how a genetic, you know, I'm trying to multitask and I was looking at the Q&A, but Gina had a comment about, you know, how after an ultra rare diagnosis, where do we go? Like, what are the next steps? And so we're very much advocating that we need investment in people and technology to help support people after a diagnosis, so that that's not a wasted, very expensive test that gets put away and doesn't change things for that child or that family. So, you know, what does that mean? How, after that diagnosis, do you find your tribe? How do you find those patient advocacy groups? How do you find out about when a clinical trial might come up? How do you register on clinical trials? How do you know about natural history studies? What are the next steps? And doing that at a time and a way that's paced for that family with the information that they want to know, and not one of my biggest bugbears is that we are seen in clinical genetics as a diagnostic once off kind of service. We're here to do the test, to give the answer, to pass it on to other teams. And just doesn't work for rare genetic conditions where we're still learning about what those mean. You know, I think that needs to be completely reframed. And I think it needs to go at a pace that for that family, each family is comfortable. And we know that after a diagnosis, people can't take anything else in. So if that's their one appointment and an outdated printed bit of paper, then we are failing miserably that family and their clinicians, because they've never heard of that condition either. So we need a new model of care, which is an ongoing interaction and support. We have a pilot at the moment for a rare disease nurse navigator. I think I put a flyer in the chat, and what we're learning, you know, we set that optimistically. So it'll be a 3 to 6 month service. We'll set up families for success. And of course, that's not working. Families have ongoing needs and questions, and their clinicians have ongoing needs and questions. So I guess that's why we're advocating for models of rare disease centers of expertise that isn't about a central building necessarily where everyone has to come. It's about knowledge sharing and connecting that's ongoing. And I guess it's more a hub and a spoke, or an ongoing process where that research is embedded and families go at a pace that works for them.
Yeah. And I think that came up in one of our earlier webinars as well, around continually checking in with your genetics team, because the landscape is changing so often. And I suppose by being connected with the condition specific groups or organizations like SWAN and GAA Australia, that's how you find out about what's happening and what's new and where things are going. I'm going to shift a little bit now because I want to talk about planning for the future when your child has a genetic condition. Obviously, that involves some very unique considerations. Emma, what should families be thinking about for their child's long-term medical care? And how does having a genetic diagnosis influence planning for the future?
Yeah, again, this comes back to my bugbear that it's a once-off
Yeah.
diagnosis and see you later, which is no often very focused on those immediate things like, do we need an echocardiogram to check for the very small chance of, a heart condition? And what we're actually talking about is how this will impact someone over their lifetime, which means the natural history is the medical way we say that of the condition. And we often have so limited information about that. So, you know, again, another shared passion of Chris and I is how can we facilitate that really detailed long-term knowledge collection in a way that is not too burdensome on families. And gee, I always want to be Scandinavian, failed miserably, but if you look at what they're doing in Finland, they're embedding all of that into the healthcare system. So when families are consented, they are pulling out the information, from the health records, so we can really truly build a model of what this condition looks like over time, because it will probably have, change over time, and that's really important that we're gathering that knowledge. So one is, how can you be part of that if that's right for you? So again, connection to a patient advocacy group. They often have their own registries or natural history studies, or we're looking at some enabling frameworks and lobbying the government that we need to be doing that, so each individual organization doesn't need to fundraise for that, so that's part of it. And two, I would say it's, really talking to your genetics service about what are the next steps and when can we come back to you. So we think about transitions, and it's not just transition from pediatric to adult care, it's from early intervention to school, from primary school to high school, and then on into aged care as well after, so at all of those points, I think what's great is if you can have a dialogue with your genetic service and know how you can tap back into them as well. And consider that young person as they get older. What are their questions? Oh, your Sparky's coming in the background.
Yeah.
I have to show, this is Chris's Sparky, which is the SCN2A dog. It's very cute. So what are their questions about their condition? How are you going to talk about this in the family? And not to be put off by people saying, oh, well, they can't communicate verbally, so of course they wouldn't have questions. We know that's not true. And we can communicate in many different ways than with verbal communication. Will has amazing use of ChatGPT, doesn't he, Chris? And tells you very much how you speak about that. But, I think that's obviously a lot of the work we're doing in our Gene Equal project, which is about how do we understand what young people with neurodevelopmental conditions want to know about that condition. How do we have those conversations? And how do we do that in a way that is actually empowering for that young person, and they're gradually becoming more involved, in decisions about their healthcare.
Yeah. Chris, from your experience with families, what are the key areas parents should be planning for as their children grow?
I think the transition points are going to be the ones that need the most planning. So I think, it's transition from one healthcare provider to another, from childcare to school, to primary school, into high school. I know we're going to touch on, pediatrics to adult care, but those transition points are the ones that I found and our families find preparing for as much as you can is going to be the ones that, it's going to make things as smooth as you possibly can. And I think from, what do you prepare? I think explaining your child's needs in a way that the care provider can understand, making sure you have all your documents in place. We were up very late last night, filling out care plans for a new program that was just gone across to. And just having, I guess, trying to be on top of all the paperwork. So when you are making these transitions, you can do them as smooth as possible. What else have I? And I think, doing that as early as you can, because particularly in the healthcare system, we had to start preparing for transition at, I think it was 14. And they were ready to kick us out as soon as we showed any indication that we were ready. But, as we all know, you get transitioned out to nothing. So the more you're prepared, the better off you'll be. And just be proactive. Be aware of what your child needs, and don't necessarily know at face value of the supports that your child might need through those transitions. And explore what might be those options, and be prepared to advocate for them. The word of the day.
Absolutely, it is the word of the day. You did mention there that transition to adult services, and I want to come to you, Emma, because this is something that families worry about. So what practical steps should families take to prepare for that transition to adult services, and when should they start thinking about it? Like Chris has just mentioned, like it kind of started it when they were
Yeah,
was 14. So
yeah, or even earlier years. So one thing is preparing the young person themselves, and then the other bit, I guess, is preparing their clinicians. So those two things. So one is, I would say, we're trying to encourage genetic services to be remembered as services that you can lean on to help support you with that question of, how do I start the conversation with my child about their genetic condition? And we say that should be sort of adolescence is a good time to do that. Early adolescence is a good time to gently start that. And a lot of our genetic counselors would say, that is something they would absolutely be delighted to help a family plan that conversation, because it's a hard one to start on. And generally it's about demystifying simple information that's age appropriate. Kids notice differences and they're very accepting of them. So just giving some explanation, and also thinking about the siblings in that mix as well, that they may well have their own questions. We often talk about health conditions, and particularly with COVID, as something that's infectious or you can catch it. So people often have misperceptions. And so having that forum to be able to have open conversations, have that young person know that there are support groups for them. And often that's great to start as early as possible, because actually coming in as you're going through the identity crisis of teenage years can be a little late as well. So sort of being part of that community and knowing that's a community for them as early as possible. And then inviting them and planning with your clinicians how they can have increasing agency in the conversations. And that might be starting simple, which chairs you want to sit in, to having a little bit more time when they can ask their own questions or put their questions on a communication board. So lots of tips around that. And I think talking with a genetic service is really good. And then for clinicians, it is, I would say my top tip is involve your GP early. And I think we do this really badly from a specialist. I look back and I realize often I wouldn't actually know who the GP was and have been included them in the letter. So how could that GP possibly know about that genetic condition? And, there is no equivalent to a pediatrician in adult land. Apart from your GP as an expert, and it's a GP specialist. Okay, so they are specialists in holistic care and in preventative health care. There are a whole range of new Medicare item numbers that allow them to spend longer appointments with people with chronic health conditions. And really, that should be something that should be starting on as early as possible. So you find a good GP. It's like a hairdresser. It might not be the first person that you find. Find a good GP that's open and curious about your child's condition. And then what we're trying to do is bring that GP more into, say, we had a clinic or something, so they know how they can contact the genetics team and get their questions answered. And then, as you probably gathered from Nika's talk, I'm a huge fan of the rare disease passport. So some sort of collated information. And Chris does this in beautiful ways. You know, it's whatever works for you. So you've got a record of all of those investigations, who the specialists, what the complications, medications. So that knowledge is not lost when you move from the pediatric to the adult system. And then the other thing is, don't think you have to do this alone. In New South Wales, we have a network of transition care supporters. There are specialist services in organisations like Sydney Children's Hospital Network, Trapeze. And so I might put a link when I finish yatting. So find out who those transition support services are so you can plan it and not have to start it from scratch.
Amazing. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit because I am mindful of the time. Just want to talk about, we've said it before, that the genetics is evolving very rapidly. Emma, what developments in genetics and treatments are you most excited about?
Well, and maybe I can tie that a bit because Kim in the chat had asked a question about precision medicine and stem cell therapies. So there's the hard sciencey bits that I'm definitely excited about. And again, just reflecting on this weekend, we had for Angelman syndrome 2 different days. One was all about precision medicine. So it was about how we understand more the changes in the genes, how that changes a protein. We are seeing therapies that are coming on board which are dramatically changing outcomes. And our hope is that will change and improve quality of life. So say for that child, it may be that unpredictable seizures are the thing that is most impacting their quality of life, and that the gene-based therapy or advanced therapeutics can actually work on the underlying genetic change that's happened and improve those symptoms and improve that quality of life. So that's my hope on that side. My fear is we're not enough talking to families and patients about what the things that matter to them that they want to change is. So that's one side. The other side is I really have hope that AI, our co-research, our more inclusive research methods will make our healthcare system a kinder and more person-centered healthcare system, where a family doesn't feel isolated, where they have a team around them and their child, and that's lifelong. And that's why we're putting a lot of efforts into things like the model for rare diseases New South Wales, because we think the healthcare needs to change.
Yeah, amazing. Chris, what changes do you see coming that will benefit families, and what should they be preparing for or looking forward to?
So, look, I think Emma's pretty much touched on this. I think there is a plethora of novel therapies coming for rare diseases, and I think that's a real positive. But it also comes with, ethical and access challenges. We need to make sure that that's managed, that there is equity of access to these conditions. Not only someone that has a loud voice or financial means to go out and find a treatment for their child. We need to be making sure that we can drive this forward collectively, and those opportunities are available to many. We also we're seeing a shift in the way the health system in Australia thinks about these novel therapies, and I think that's a lot influenced by families and the rare disease community collectively. That in the past, the evidence that we need to support getting these treatments to families will now include lived experience. So the evidence that you're building as a family or as a community, it will now be considered in the bigger system of evidence to get treatments to families. So I think that's a really big shift, and I think we should be really positive about that change, and I think that's continuing to evolve. I think the power of knowing, so the evolution of newborn screening is a real positive, that will be available to different conditions as the government, sees the value and risk benefits on those. I think the other shift that I've seen more recently is consideration of families in clinical trials and making sure that that voice is really part of that story, and that goes across the whole life cycle of doing clinical trials to getting access. And if we bring that lived experience in early, then that really provides a positive experience right through, and hopefully it expedites in some ways as well. But yeah, and I think also because we're rare and we don't know everything, being involved is really driving change forward. It may not come in your family's lifetime, but it will drive change. So there's just so much going on at the minute that we're learning a lot, where we're finding ways to do things better. And I think there has really been a big shift in momentum around families' stories being, I guess, the lever for change. So yeah, I think that's a really positive step that's coming and will continue, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, my next question was going to be around the power of family stories and experiences, but I think you both have really highlighted how impactful when families share their stories and experiences, and whether that's through research, advocacy, or just simply connecting with others, that ripple effect that it can have. So I'll spare you that question because I feel like we've already covered it. What I want to talk about now is just those next steps before we maybe get to a couple of those questions that have popped up in the chat. But for families that are leaving this series feeling inspired to get involved, Chris, what's the very first step you recommend for a family that wants to start contributing to positive change? And how do they figure out what's right for them?
Yeah, so I think, I guess going back to some of the things I mentioned earlier, like, what's your strength? What do you want to contribute? And really, the other thing I would, part of those steps is, what's my capacity? Like, Emma touched on it before, sometimes people running groups, doing 10 different jobs, some of them paid, many not. I think, there's a lot of things that we need to take into consideration when we are thinking about what we want to lean into. And I think capacity is one that should be up there. I think, find a mentor, go to, some activities that are happening in your particular community, and look at people who've walked the path that you're going down and see if there's anything that you can connect in with them. Yeah, as I said before, maybe a mentor, and just think you don't have to do it all. Just contributing something makes a difference, and do it when you're ready, not when someone else says it's time to go. You've got to be able to manage that along with all the other things going on in your life. So yeah, consider your own well-being in that decision making.
Absolutely. Finally, what legacy and future are we building together? So, Emma, looking ahead, what future do you envision for families affected by genetic conditions, and how do research and family voices combine to create that future?
Yeah, so I would love a model of care where families are at the center of everything, that it is not one size fits all, that it is a model that fits a rural family, a family where English isn't their first language, where they're from a community where their family is the most important part, a model for Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander families that truly is culturally nourishing. So many different models of care that truly are person and family centered, but which gives the options along the way of connection to other families, to patient support groups. Well, actually, I would love so much of the patient support work to be truly acknowledged by government and funded by government, where research is embedded into our standard of care, um, so that every family has the opportunity of being in the best possible position to either have new treatments available or be part of those trials, and for that to work for them so that they're appropriately supported, and that it is recognized that rare diseases go beyond health, and that we are truly working together in a seamless way so that that child's school is nurturing and nourishing and really plays to the child's strengths and supports which areas they may need more support, and that transition and that young person is feeling empowered. And I don't think that's pie in the sky. I think, when it comes to this, and you see how big that difference that is from how we are at the moment, with families lost and isolated and staying up all night Googling, and that weight of responsibility that seems to be on their shoulders. If we think about what happens when a child gets a diagnosis of cancer, I mean, that's heartbreaking, but that whole team comes around that family. The trials are there, the research is there, the proactive mental health support for the whole family is there. And, these are now conditions that kids live and flourish with. So I don't think we should feel that's unachievable. And with AI and genomic advances, hopefully it will happen more and more. But if families are not included from the start, it will widen inequity gaps.
It really is a watch this space kind of space at the moment, isn't it? There's just so much changing. There's so much.
But also, as Chris said, get involved in how, because government won't listen to me.
I'm sure you've tried.
Oh yeah, it's families that will make that change. And so if you find a space where you feel comfortable to lend your voice and be part of a team, that is what's going to make change.
Yeah,
definitely isn't us or the researchers asking for more money. We are in a cost negative situation. We need to show how we are falling behind on our responsibilities to families with rare conditions. The UN resolution, the World Health Organization say these are critically important changes that would need to be made.
Yeah. Chris, what's one last message of hope and possibility that you would leave families with today as they continue their journey?
Yeah, look, I think, yeah, as we've said, I think we're reshaping healthcare. And I think for families such as ours, it's building momentum where we have services that we don't need to navigate in silos. And I think, we've seen a recent shift with the Federal Health Minister now holding that disability portfolio as well. And I think these seem like small shifts, but I feel like this is driving in the right direction. So I think that's going to reduce complexities for our families and how we navigate, and hopefully take some of that caregiver responsibility and place it in the system. As someone that really advocates for caregiver wellbeing, I think this is a really positive step forward. And I think in terms of like leaving a legacy, for me it's really about finding connecting people, connecting communities, and building equity into our system, and really having a strong belief in that what we're doing is leaving a positive legacy for people following behind us.
Amazing. Thank you. I'll quickly bring Em in. I know the other Emma, she's been very busy in the chat, and I've seen there's some questions in the Q&A box, and I know that Chris and Emma, Dr. Palmer, are very busy and might need to rush away, but is there anything that you wanted to bring to life from the chat or the Q&A box to any of our panelists?
I'm just amazed at Dr. Emma Palmer answering and speaking in real time. I think that is phenomenal. There were a couple of questions in the chat that related to individual circumstances, and I just want to stress again that we are so happy to follow up on any of those with our genetic health navigator, especially as it pertains to sort of self-advocacy for finding the right clinician and finding out more information about testing and pathways. So please don't feel like it ends here. You can follow up with us, especially if you want to share some more personal information. There has been such an amazing diverse range of questions. I want to check because Deb very patiently asked one right at the start around Alpha Genomics AI tool. And I don't know if Emma Palmer answered this.
No, I tried and I pressed the wrong blooming button, so I apologize. It was so I think it's there's some pretty cool AI things, and I was actually at a meeting last week where they were comparing that to how good the AI is getting at analyzing a variant and saying, is it likely to be causing the condition or not? And it's pretty good. So I think, AI always needs to be checked. AI can hallucinate. So you just need to keep that, I think we still need guide rails. Is that the word I'm supposed to use? And check, but I think it will save a lot of time and allow us to do the bits that we are hopefully getting better at, which is then explaining that to a family and moving it forward.
Thank you, Emma. And I think the other questions have been answered, but what I am taking from this chat is that I think there's another webinar in this.
I was thinking the same thing.
So I will leave it there, but thank you so much, Emma, for being such an amazing multitasker.
Yeah, and Chris has just had to drop off because she's a busy woman and off to another presentation. So, but yes, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for Shaping the Future. It's the final session at the moment, I say, because I'm sure Emma and I will be chatting after this. But over the 4 sessions, we've traveled together for those first questions about whether something might be genetic, through receiving and understanding results, navigating daily systems, and now looking towards the future and hope, with hope and purpose. Thank you, Dr. Palmer. Thank you to Chris.
Emma.
Yes, you have. It's actually inspiring to hear the work that you guys are doing, and not just what support and opportunities are available for families, but also the important role you play in creating that positive change for others walking this path. Whilst this webinar series concludes today, everyone who's watching, your journey continues. So the insights, connections, and confidence you've built over these sessions are tools you can carry on with. Remember that every question you ask, every system you navigate, and every step you take makes the path a little clearer for the families who will follow. So whether you're sharing your story, participating in research, advocating for better services, or simply connecting with other families, your experience matters. The challenges you've faced and overcome, the insights you've gained, and the resilience you've built, all of this has value beyond your own family. So we encourage you to stay connected with both Alongside Families and the Genetic Alliance Australia, as well as those condition-specific organisations and networks that you've learned about. The community you've begun to build here can be a source of ongoing support and strength. Throughout these series, I just want to say thank you to all of our expert speakers who've shared their knowledge with such generosity, and to our parent speakers who shared their stories with courage, and to all of those who have joined us, thank you. Your participation, your questions, and your willingness to share your own experience has made this series richer for everybody. As we said, the genetics field is rapidly evolving, bringing new possibilities and hope. Your family stories matter, your voice has power, and your journey, while uniquely yours, is part of a larger community working towards better outcomes for all children and families affected by genetic conditions. So thank you so much for allowing us to be part of your journey. We wish you and your families all the best as you continue to write your own story and continue to contribute to the future we're building together. So thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Palmer. Emma. Thank you, Emma. I'm sure there's a lot of resources that are going to be sent out with this video because there's a lot of stuff happening in the chat. So I will save that and make sure they're connected with the recording that's sent out. But I hope everybody has a wonderful day, and I look forward to seeing everyone online again one day soon. Thanks,
Thank-
Emma. Thanks, Emma.
Thank you.